So we're going to set up another thing, which is called Puzzle 3, which is a little scenario, which we call making money from making widgets. Widgets is the typical all-purpose kind of thing that in economics classes people make. So we suppose that two entrepreneurs each borrow $1 million to make widgets and super widgets respectively. The widgets take 1 year to produce and the super widgets 2 years. Both entrepreneurs pay their workers and suppliers in advance, getting back to that timing issue, right at the start, and they pay out the whole sum of money. Now, we'll assume that there is a Vixellian bank representing the financial system as a whole. A Vixellian bank is one where you've kind of amalgamated the central banks and the commercial banks, and there's just one bank, whose liabilities count as money. Suppose that this bank has simply been given a charter to make it legal and actually starts out with 0 reserves and 0 capital. Interestingly enough, most regulation theory about banking has to do with imposing reserve requirements or imposing capital requirements. Here we start out with 0 reserves and 0 capital. The bank just has a charter. The bank charges 10% simple interest on loans, but does not insist on repayment of either principal or accumulated interest until after the production period of each firm. Then, whenever goods are available, all the deposit holders amongst the, quote, non-bank public, that's the firms, the workers, your point about, the firms paying the workers, well taken. The non-bank public will always try to spend 80% of their money holdings and save 20%. And it's assumed that no other financial transactions occur in this economy. And then all the bank profits, when the banks do make profits, are going to be retained by the bank owners to build up their capital. And that's a very crucial point. You'll see that well-capitalized banks are not necessarily a good thing.
Okay, can you either be employed at the normal widget or the super widget factory? And in the one, if I'm in the super widget factory, then I get my wage for 2 years ahead. And then I still consume 80% of it immediately, the same as the people in the simple widget factory who only got wages 1 year ahead. That seems odd that I should behave in the same way when I...
Yes, I don't think that makes a whole lot of difference because if it stayed with the firms, they would also pay 80%. If the firms sort of borrowed the money, kept it for themselves, and didn't pay the workers till the beginning of the second year, they would still have the same propensity to consume of 80%.
Yeah, but total consumption will be very high in year one in this example, right?
No, the consumption, there's certainly going to be $2 million worth of money, okay, in the holdings of the non-bank public, right? So, maybe the phrasing of that way of paying the workers, and that's just a simplification to get the ball rolling. It's not anything significant. The key point is that there's 2 million in the accounts of the non-bank public. That's why I use that expression, non-bank public. And then, actually, I'm going to turn over to Fred now, and he's going to sort of work you through that argument.
Okay, so now you have the scenario of this puzzle. And by the way, this puzzle is actually my personal favorite because I'm delivering it. And you have this balance sheet to start it off with, 0 loans and 0 deposit. And by the way, this is when charter is granted. If any one of you ever been to Hong Kong, you find their money is kind of funny because you find different $50 and they're both legit. And sometimes I call one of them fake because I haven't seen it. And it happens to be, I'm just not that open. So Hong Kong is actually a very funny situation where this charter banks come into play. So I find this to be a really realistic, again, kind of a simulation to start off with. So now we have super widgets and widget company borrowing $1 million each. So that will make the loan $2 million, and that money again is deposited back to the bank, and that money is again used to buy inputs to pay workers and etc. So in the first year, this is how we calculate this whole thing. We have 80% of consumption rate with $2 million in the public. So that means $1.6 million of more like a purchasing power, consumption power happening. And in the first year, the widget maker cost, the cost to widget maker is 1.1 million, which is calculated as the principal plus the interest. And there's a possible profit of $500,000. So we're assuming that all the money that are in the public are used to purchase this goods, so that this possible profit essentially is their profit. And a couple more calculations to go over with. First one, bank capital. This one's more like a simplified version of how I calculate the bank capital, because later on when it involves losses, I do it in another way. But since the bank capital, again, is what you borrow times the interest rate, that essentially belongs to the bank. Only under gains, I'm just assuming this is how we calculate it. So in the first year, we have 100,000. Loan amount at the end of the first year essentially is what you borrow minus what is matured. In this case, we borrow 2 million. At the end of year one, $1 million matured. So 1 million left, which that money, again, is going to be running as the consumption power for the second year, as we can see how that affects the economy later on. On the deposit side, we have a saving rate times the deposit minus profit. That's essentially the end amount for the public deposit. In this case, we have 2 million times 0.2. Essentially, that's their saving. That's the money they're not spending. That's the money they're putting into their bank account, and perhaps buying a house or some sort. And the profit the businesses are making are deposited back to the bank. So in this case, we have 900,000. As you can see, 900,000 plus 100,000 equal to the loan amount. So these two are liabilities, or equity, liability, and assets. And for simplicity, we're just going to call both liabilities. So this is what the balance sheet will look like after a year. As discussed, the business made money, made $500,000. And that loan essentially is retired, and this is the balance sheet that's left at the end of the first year or the beginning of the second year. So doing the same calculation once more, we'll find that 0.8 times 900,000 will get you 720,000. And the cost, again, the reason this is 1.2 million is because the interest is not paid in the first year. That's accumulative. We're assuming just simple interest. So that's 1.2 million to be paid at the end of the year. As you can see, there's going to be a loss at the end of the year. So in this case, the firm will go bankrupt, and we'll talk about the fate of the bank and the worker in the following slides. As you can see, there's a trend building. Go ahead.
That was exactly my worry, that now consumption is much lower in the second period than it was in the first. So and why? I can see that you have assumed that, and then you work out the numbers, and that's correct. But I think the initial assumption looks weird to me.
No, the money supply has fallen. That's the point. Money is endogenous.
What I think is the main problem in here is that we do assume in this setup that firm one, the normal widget firm, ceases production after year one, which is non-ergodic, which is not logical at all. If we had assumed that firm one would just take out another loan at the end of year one when they paid back the first loan, then we wouldn't have the problem, and it would repeat onwards forever.
No, that's what we're going to do next.
We're actually going to demonstrate.
Then we don't have a problem anymore.
No, we're coming on to that problem anymore. It requires, you've hit the nail on the head, it requires someone somewhere, some sector of the economy, to continuously be in debt. You've just made the point.
Sure. So the loss equation, again, when we have a loss, it's a calculation, again, I do it a little bit differently. It's the beginning is bank as equity, and plus the money that are paid to the bank, minus the amount of loans that are retired. So that's going to be your ending bank equity. So what we have here is beginning as 100,000. What was paid to the bank is 720,000, which is essentially this money right here. All that money belongs to the bank. And the loan retired is 1 million. That's going to leave a loss, the minus 180 minus equities. So on the balance sheet, we're going to have something like this. Your deposit is going to be 180,000. And your bank capital is going to be minus 180,000. So does that actually mean anything? No, it doesn't, because the bank authority went bankrupt. When a charter bank went bankrupt, that means all the money they're issuing essentially becomes paper, and that money is no longer money. So in this case, the bank goes bankrupt. The firm is not making any money. The people who are holding on to these deposits, who are wage makers, essentially lose their money. In this economy, in the very end of it, everybody loses. Again, the bank is losing, that deposit is gone, and again, the possible profit is a big negative number. So what can we get out of it? Here's coming back one more step. This is 1 year scenario. If I'm borrowing $1 million, by the end of the first year, I need to repay 1.1 million. There is not enough money in the world that can allow me to repay that 1.1 million, given that the money supply is only $1 million. So the conclusion that I arrive from this kind of chart, and what we've done here, is that the last player is definitely destined to go bankrupt, which I'll again prove later on in a 5-year scenario stage. So there's definitely not enough money to go around, since there is no credit creation at the end of the period, and there's interest to be paid, and that interest is not generated internally in the system because no one's borrowing. So the question comes to me is there a way out? I think that ties to that question over there. Yes, there is a way out. There's actually a couple ways out. First one, having the first widget maker come to the market again, borrow another $1 million right before the super widget maker retires their loans, which is exactly what he proposed, and this solves the crisis. So again, this is increasing animal spirits because the firm are essentially spending more money, and there's more money in circulation. And second one is to have domestic consumer to borrow. So for example, the wage earners, let them borrow, let them to fund their the widgets. So that injects more money into the economy. That allows the super widget maker to make more money just because there's more money in there to be made. Third one is probably the most popular one in China. So the foreign sector borrows, as you guys know, China has been experiencing pretty good growth in the past decades or so, 3 decades, I think almost. I think one of the main reasons behind that is Americans almost funding the Chinese growth. America is borrowing, therefore injecting the money into China. There is more money in China. There is more money for Chinese business. There is more money to be made in China. And American, again, is in a really bad situation just because it's funding the Chinese growth in this form. And fourth one is the government borrows. I'm not sure if you guys know the debt pyramid. The last one is the government, because when the government borrows, that interest rate is the smallest. So again, coming back to the mandate of the government, government should, in many of cases, start spending to get the economy out of the cluster which we see here. just because when the government borrows, it's usually the cheapest and the most efficient way out there. So in the whole lecture, we're probably going to collaborate a lot of the role on the government, and this is the first role of the government, which is to spend money by borrowing. Inject money into the public so that more firms have money to spend. Oh, by the way, all these four possibilities essentially come down to one thing. There has to be borrowing made in order for there to be profit made. So again, now we're assuming there is going to be another widget maker, maybe the first one, maybe another one, in injecting $1 million into the economy. We'll see what happens in this case. As you know, there's a clear giveaway. It solves the crisis, but we want to see how much it solves the crisis, and can this continue on. So now the balance sheet looks like this. Loans is $2 million. That, again, is deposited back into the deposit. Bank capital is still the same. So with 1.9 million as the money in circulation, 0.8% consumption rate, that will generate $1,520,000 worth of money to be made in the economy. And the cost to the super widget, again, is a 2-year project. So the cost is 1.2 million instead of 1.1 million. So there is a possible profit of 320,000. So this essentially solves the crisis. At the end of the year, we're going to have this balance sheet right here. Loan is 1 million, deposit is 700,000, bank capital is 300,000. As you guys might have already aware, what's going to happen next. Of course, there's going to be another crisis coming, because the money in circulation is not enough to fund, again, the interest rate and the payment of the principal. So we're going to run into a balance sheet that looks like this. Again, bank capital decreases, deposit means nothing, and there's a loss of 540,000 in total. So without money generation, without someone going into debt, this scenario will come again, which we'll see in a 5-year scenario, which I made in Excel. By the way, I love Excel. And this is the first-year scenario. If no one borrows, this person loses. Second-year scenario, again, we will see here. The second mover goes bankrupt. Third-year scenario, the third mover goes bankrupt. Fourth year, fourth mover goes bankrupt. So that shows us one thing. If people stop going in debt, there's going to be the last player coming in is going to go bankrupt. As we can see in the case of bankruptcy, wage worker loses quite a bit because they lose all their savings. Business is not making money, and the charter bank shuts down. And is there a way out? Yes, there is. And in a later slides, I'm going to show you. There's actually a way out of this situation. This is not just a Ponzi scheme that feeds on itself. And by the way, Ponzi scheme is a pyramid scheme. And what we have here, I call it the rectangle scheme, because it's in an equilibrium, and everything runs very smoothly. You don't have to have double the money you have in the first period in order to be sustainable. And I think in the next slide, I made this slide on my own because this kind of shows when the crisis start to occur. What happens is the difference between this slide and this slide is I raised up the interest rate by 5%. As you can see here, this player, if you guys know a little bit of game theory, this player is definitely not going to move into the economy, because if he moves in, no one follows, he loses. If he moves in and someone else follows, he still loses. So the fourth player is gone. So which left us with the 3-year scenario, knowing that the third player doesn't know the fourth player's move. So this is more like a game theory predicting when is a crisis going to happen. So if we raise interest by 5% in this case, we're going to run from a 5-year scenario continue on into a 3-year scenario going bankruptcy. So raising interest is a bad thing. And also, going back to the 100-year debate between Hayek and Keynes, as we can see here is the power of spending and saving. Because what Hayek proposes that people need to spend money. Oh, wait, what? Oh no, did I say Hayek? I mean Keynes. Keynes means spending money in order for the economy to grow. Where Hayek proposed exactly the opposite. It's saying that once you start making investment, it's going to run into a situation like this. And one of the really awesome insight I haven't really pointed out is that, as you can see in this economy, that the first year loss is 300,000, then it escalates. Not only it escalates, the money that to be made later on is actually less than the previous year. So is Hayek correct in that sense? We don't think so, because there is actually an equilibrium. So again, coming back to this, is this equilibrium? Of course not. Numbers are still changing. There is no constant in this scenario at all. So this is not a scenario, equilibrium solution. Oh, also, banks are accumulating capital. I hope I showed it here. No, I haven't. By the way, banks are accumulating capital, as you can see in this case. By the end of the third year, they have 300,000 instead of 100,000 in the first case. So, and the public is leaking capital, as you proposed or you proposed somewhere back then. So this is not an equilibrium. So the equilibrium really starts. By the way, there are 2 points to this chart. One is when the saving of the bank is 100%, we can see that there is no way to get out of the situation rather than running perhaps a Ponzi scheme, because we need to borrow way more in order to fund the leak of capital. But once we set the saving of the bank to 0%, there is no incentive for the bank to essentially run a bank, because you're not saving anything, you're not making money from it. And it's definitely not a profit maximizing point. So for banks, there's an equilibrium point between 0% and 100% that the bank will be making constant money, the public will be making constant money, and there's no bankruptcy for eternity, and which is at this point, when public saving equal to bank saving. In this case, it's 20%. So under this scenario, bank will always make a profit, worker will always make wages, business will always be in profit, as we can see here. Now setting everything to 20% with still 10% interest rate. And by the way, the 400,000, you might be confused about this, but this is remember the super widget paid 200,000 in a year. So that's why this number might be a little bit smaller, so I don't want that to confuse you. As you can see in the 5-year scenario, this continues on. I'm going to inject another $1 million here. This is going to be another 500,000. So again, this is not a Ponzi scheme, because every year I'm essentially injecting another $1 million. And again, this continues on. So it's equilibrium capital level for the banks. If you run this internally, there we go, 125. And that means a spending of 100,000 per year. So I think the really big takeaway, as you can see, there are some numbers that are coinciding here. So 100,000 is a spending, it's actually the money gained from the public. So what we get in this case is that banks need to spend money to make money. And another really famous word, banks get what they spend, and workers spend what they get. This is showing in this Excel model. Spending 100,000, you're making sure you never go bankrupt. And workers get what they spend. Once they spend everything they earn, they make sure the business never go bankrupt. Therefore, they get their wage. So this is quite a phenomenon that we find in this really simple Excel model. So I really do recommend trying a lot of things hands-on because you tend to learn quite a bit from it. And so now I'm going to run 3 scenarios with Excel that I built for.
Can I just interject?
Go ahead.
You were going to ask a question, are you?
Yes, just a very short one. What does interest in your model represent? Time preference?
No, it's not time preference. I mean, here, essentially, it's post-Keynesian horizontalism. The bank is setting the interest rate. Obviously, if we're going to have a more complete model, we're going to have a model with more interest rates in it. If you cast your mind back, the AMM this morning had 2 interest rates in it. And so there's how can I put it, there's scope for the problem that you see. There is an issue which is very prominent in circuit theory, which is where do the interest payments come from? And if you notice, this model solves that problem. The interest payments themselves come from more borrowing.
Okay. So now we'll see Hayek's theory in action. So what he proposes is that people should save more in order for the economy to be well. So let's inject this. What did I propose? Oh, saving 35%. Okay. So with a saving of 35%, as you can see here is that business actually make less money, and the economy will go into crisis very soon, actually sooner than the 20% saving rate. Bank is generating same amount of profit, but again, the crisis occur much faster if people decide to save more. And another one we want to do is what happens when we increase interest rate? Because the central bank really like to play around with interest rates. And we just want to show the potential effect. If you double the interest rate, now it's 20%. Also, the bank earn quite a bit from it. As you can see, the economy doesn't even last till, there's no economy in this case. Because the second, oh wait, there's the economy here. So there's a 2-year economy based on a 10% increase in interest rate. So increasing interest rate or increasing savings does no good in this economy, in our model. And in reality, it's true. Just one last quick point. I have 4 questions here. I just want to go through the first 2, because first 2 are commonly seen in a banking situation. First one is called the reserve requirements. Second one is called capital requirements. What do those 2 have? The effect of those 2 on the economy that's in the model that we built. As you know, that reserve requirements and capital requirements limits the bank able to the ability to lend in the bank. Therefore, in our model here, if banks are not lending, or banks have limited ability to lend, therefore, the next player wouldn't be here. In that case, the crisis will come sooner. I think that's the last point I want to make. Capital requirements and the reserve requirement is probably one of the worst things that the government can do to solve crisis, because it doesn't solve crisis, it makes them come sooner. That's the end of the presentation. Go enjoy your lunch.